Today, we're going to talk about how sharing your biggest management mistakes may be one of the kindest things that you can do to develop other people.
Yeah, so there's a psychologist. I can't remember if he's a psychologist or a pediatrician, and his wife is
Marshall Duke.
And his wife.
I can't remember her name.
Escapes me.
Yeah.
But they're both the Dukes. And they were doing a study on what makes kids resilient, and they happened to have one of their groups of kids were in Manhattan, and then 9/11 happened. And so they had what in social psychology you call a natural experiment. You're actually studying this thing, and then something happens where you can get a actual assessment of how did people recover from this trauma. And so they continued their study of resilience, and they focused in on the children, and they tried to discern over the years what made some of the kids a little more resilient than the others. And they never could find anything conclusive, but they had a lingering, unusual finding in their research, which was that the kids who scored the highest on what you and I would call family trivia, just a set of questions that they were asking.
So 20 questions, I think.
Yeah, as a way of collecting information. Like, do you know how your parents meet? Do you know the stories of any black sheep in the family? Basically family trivia and folklore, but the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of stuff. Kids who scored higher on those measures of family trivia tended to be more resilient, and they never could understand it. They didn't have a good theory for why this might be, and so they weren't taking it too seriously. They thought, well, maybe it's just something that correlates, but there's no real reason. Or there's no real reason that we can discern.
Right. Meanwhile, they'd also tested every personality trait.
And none of it
to
be predictive of resilience. One of the pair of the Dukes was talking to a friend of theirs who happened to read a lot of books. And he's like, oh, well, I understand why that is, why you're picking that up. And they're like, well, why? And he's like, yeah, you got to read this book. It's called In Every War But One, and it's by Eugene Kincaid. And it's about how during the Korean War, the North Koreans were able to get an unusually high number of Americans held in captivity to actually either turn against America or actually stay in their country once the war was over, which was mind-boggling. And, it was in the best interest of the armed forces to figure out how did this happen. And so Eugene Kincaid chronicles all this in this book, In Every War But One. And the basic gem of what the North Koreans did, their gem may not be the right word, but their insight was that you can't get anywhere with people who truly understand that America is imperfect and has a lot of warts. And so it may be a great country, but there's a lot of racism. It may be a great country, but it's hard to get ahead if you're poor. Those types of imperfections.
Like loving something while also being able to look at it honestly and see that it's got imperfections.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the North Koreans wouldn't isolate or try to work on anybody who had that kind of warts and all view of America. They would instead focus on the mom and apple pie, the people who had a more two-dimensional view of America. Like, this is my country. I love it. This country's close to perfect, Well,
you kind of see some people who, I think you can identify some people just naturally who probably fall into this. Like, you say something negative about the country that is true, and we're part of this country, and you will get people who have a very negative defensive reaction to it. And that's an indication that they're sort of this apple pie kind of person.
Yeah. And so that's who the North Koreans focused on. That's who, over a period of weeks and months of basically re-education, were able to show them evidence of here's some examples of racism in America. Here's some examples where poverty is structural, meaning very hard to overcome. Here's some examples of, the country making mistakes in the past. Like, lay this out when
Over
someone's
and
in
over
captivity.
into
Yeah.
captivity. Right. And so basically
Yep.
they break
Yep.
the person's model.
And so the person that Marshall Duke or his wife was having lunch with said, that's what's going on in your study, is that your family trivia is picking up who actually has a richer, more in-depth, which child has a more in-depth understanding of their family, obviously age appropriate, but warts and all. Do they know how their parents actually met? Do they know when the family struggled? Do they know who the black sheep of the family is? This kind of thing. And it's those people who tend to be more, those children who tend to be more resilient. And those stories became known as those kind of up and down, what's known as an oscillating narrative, what you and I are calling in here 3D. And that does seem to contribute to resilience, knowing that things may be good now, but there have been dips before. And this isn't the first time that there's been a setback. And that if things look bad today, well, they've been bad before, but we overcame some of these things. And so that's why we wanted to talk in this episode about how helping people see how you've made mistakes, how things haven't been great before in the company may actually counterintuitively serve to help your people persist in the face of obstacles.
Yeah, well, when I think about that in terms of work, I remember my advisor, like, basically couldn't get rid of a mom who wasn't happy that her daughter got an A minus, or maybe it was a B plus, and like was just relentless, like not accepting it, trying to force her will. And like you hear a lot of stories about that, and technically, like, because of the FIPA.
Yeah, the disclosure.
Technically, you're not allowed to talk to a parent about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Kid's 18, yeah.
Yeah. And even doesn't matter if you're paying for them or not. They're 18. They have privacy. But it's that relentless pursuit by the parent that doesn't accept the valleys. And then you hear some of the consequences in the workforce because of it, where you have people who just absolutely cannot take any feedback. And, I wonder if it's all just this frailty that, for lack of a better term, because this is definitely going back a ways, but the helicopter parenting basically created. Because I think if you look out, across this country right now, there's a good percentage of it appears, that has a very hard time with sort of the criticism on something that they love. They have a very shallow view, a requirement for perfection, right? A 2D view of themselves, the country, I don't need, maybe their work, their football team.
Sure.
And it's not serving any of us very well, in that we basically have stopped being able to have a lot of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the research, they separate the three narratives. The oscillating that we talked about tends to be the healthiest and most resilient. I know there's ups, I know there's downs. It's like the grandparents' wisdom from years and years and years ago of, you're never as good as you think, if you're never as bad as you think either. You're kind of...
You're somewhere in there.
Ups and downs, yeah. Well, we know that the descending narrative of things used to be great, but now they're terrible. Well, that's very demotivating. So that's not a good story to have in your head. But what you're pointing out, which I think is important for this podcast and for people out there, is the ascending narrative is also problematic, because things keep getting better. That's a very hard bar to clear. And it's a better way of saying it, that bar is so hard to clear that it's unrealistic.